Have you ever stopped to think about what happens when an unstoppable force meets an adaptation with no ceiling? Like seriously, sit with that for a second. On one side, you have Milim Nava, a creature that has existed for over 2,000 years, daughter of the god who literally built the world, carrying enough power to erase entire countries from the map in the blink of an eye. On the other, you have Rimuru Tempest, a guy who died from a random stabbing on some ordinary street in Tokyo and woke up as a blob of slime in the middle of a forest. And yet, that little blue chunk of gelatin became the most talked about being in the entire TenSura universe. So the question nobody can keep quiet about is this: who is stronger, Rimuru or Milim? Look, this debate is far from simple, and if you think the answer is obvious, you probably haven't seen the full picture yet, because depending on where you are in the story, anime, manga, light novel, or web novel, the answer changes dramatically, and that's exactly what we're going to break apart today. No fluff, no spoilers dropped out of nowhere, with every argument built from the ground up. Stay with me until the end, because the conclusion is going to leave you with a question I bet you've never considered about these two. First, let's establish the battlefield. TenSura isn't a series that just throws character power levels around without logic. There's a very well-constructed power scaling system. Class rankings, existence points, ultimate skills, draconic abilities, and so on. So before anyone starts screaming that one beat the other, you need to understand what each of them actually represents within that system. Milim exists on a level that, for a long time, was treated as unreachable. She's classified as Catastrophe rank, the highest classification before you enter the territory of entities that transcend the concept of combat itself. Rimuru at the start of the anime is introduced as Disaster rank, which is already terrifying. But when Great Sage analyzes Milim for the first time, the answer is simple. Milim is 10 times stronger than you right now. 10 times. That's not a power-up gap. That's a gap in dimension. And that's the absurd distance where the story begins. But how does Rimuru close that gap? That's what changes everything. Take a breath and picture this. You were born before any of the world's systems existed the way they do today. Your father was the Star King Dragon, Veldanava, the being who created the TenSura universe through sheer will. And before you were even born, you already inherited an absurd fraction of his divine power. That is Milim Nava's starting point. She didn't get strong through training. She didn't evolve by stacking skills over the years. She simply was what she is, a dragonoid, the only one in history half human and half true dragon, which places her in a category that has no comparison anywhere in the world. Let's talk about the cards she's holding, because each one of them is a standalone argument in this discussion. The first and most devastating is the Mana Breeder Reactor. This specific power turns Milim into an infinite engine. While every other being, even the true dragons, has an energy limit that can be drained in a long fight, Milim simply doesn't have that problem. The more she fights, the more the reactor feeds the fire. That turns any battle of attrition into suicide for whoever's on the other side. You can't wait for her to get tired. She won't get tired. The second card is the ultimate skill Satanel, the Lord of Wrath. It's a skill built around rage, and what it does is simple and terrifying. The more anger Milim feels, the stronger she becomes. There's no ceiling. The increase is limitless. So provoking her in combat isn't a strategy. It's signing your death sentence in red ink. The third card is Dragon Nova. This is the technique most fans know from the anime, a concentrated attack that converts all of Milim's energy into a beam of pure destruction. No conventional defense in the world of TenSura has a recorded survival against it at full power. It's like launching a new star directly at your target. And on top of all of that, there's something that makes a massive difference in any serious analysis: 2,000 years of battle experience. While Rimuru barely started understanding his own powers, Milim had already waged wars against true dragons and divine entities across millennia. Experience is not a minor detail in the series. The system itself confirms that raw magical volume doesn't equal strength. Refined skill and real combat experience carry enormous weight. In the anime, and let's be very clear about this, Milim surpasses Rimuru in a way that is simply not up for debate. She's not hiding how strong she is when she first appears in the series. She's just being Milim in her relaxed state, which is already a catastrophe. When she enters Stampede mode, even Guy Crimson, the first Demon Lord, has to calculate if he'd survive a full confrontation with her. Now comes the turning point that changes the entire game. Let me put you inside a scene for a second. Picture a 37-year-old Japanese programmer with no grand ambitions beyond a decent apartment and maybe dinner with someone special someday. This guy dies in the most completely unremarkable way imaginable and wakes up in a dark cave as a blob of slime that absorbs everything it touches. For most people, that would be the end, but for Rimuru Tempest, it was the beginning of a journey that literally rewrote the laws of the universe he fell into. What makes Rimuru different isn't raw strength, it's the skill that defines everything. Predator, and later Beelzebub, the ability to absorb, analyze, and incorporate the power of everything he consumes. It's not copying, it's assimilation at a cellular, spiritual, and magical level. And that, combined with another ability that very few characters in the history of anime possess, Great Sage, which later evolves into Raphael and then into CL, creates a combination that has no precedent in the series. Rimuru doesn't just accumulate power, he processes it, optimizes it, and synthesizes it in ways that characters with millennia of life could never imagine, because they never had his analytical capacity. Let's follow the evolution ladder. Early on, he consumes Ifrit and Orc Disaster Geld. Then he defeats and absorbs the core of Charybdis. With each absorption, he grows in leaps. When he first consumes Veldanava, Great Sage already warns him, "You just made a jump that would have taken any other being decades." When he becomes a true Demon Lord, Raphael informs him that his magic heals multiplied by 10. Read that again, by 10 in a single event. But it's in the light novel where things truly go off the rails of imagination. During the Great War arc, Rimuru goes beyond his true Demon Lord form and consolidates his full true dragon form. And this is where the overtaking begins. Milim is a dragonoid, a hybrid of human and dragon with roughly 50 to 60% of Veldanava's power inherited. Rimuru, by completing his transformation into a true dragon, accesses the origin that true dragons carry. The difference is that he doesn't carry the limitations that Milim's biology imposes. And then, in Volume 19, something happens that most fans who only watch the anime will never get to see. Rimuru transcends the true dragon form and reaches divinity. He stands at the level of Veldanava, the creator of the world, the being that Milim has always honored as her father. Rimuru, the slime who woke up in a cave without even knowing the name of the world he landed in, reaches the same standing as the god who built that universe from nothing. Functionally, Rimuru becomes the new god. In volumes 22 and 23 of the light novel, the consolidated power hierarchy places Veldanava at the absolute top, because he's the origin of everything. But Rimuru sits in second place, practically equaling and in some aspects surpassing every other being in the series, including Milim. The ability Void God Azathoth that he acquires operates on a plane of existence that goes beyond what Milim can reach with her Satanael. She holds infinite power in the physical plane. He begins operating outside that plane entirely. But here comes the point that most analyses sweep under the rug. For a significant stretch of the journey, especially in Volume 16, which is where most recent analyses focus, Rimuru and Milim are literally standing side by side. With the incorporation of Veldora and Velgrind, Rimuru reaches a combined 170 million EP. Milim operates on infinite energy. In actual combat at that point in the story, Milim still holds the advantage of 2,000 years of experience against a being who just reached that power level. Rimuru is still figuring out the new buttons on the dashboard. So the honest answer is, it depends heavily on where in the story you are. In the anime, Milim surpasses Rimuru by a wide margin. In the manga and intermediate light novel arcs, the gap shrinks dramatically, and there are points where the two are practically tied. At the end of the light novel, Rimuru overtakes Milim and reaches divinity. But this raises a question that most people never ask, and that's the one I want to leave you with. So we have both sides on the scale. Milim Nava, infinite energy, an ultimate skill that scales with rage, 2,000 years of experience, direct daughter of the world's creator, capable of wiping out entire armies in stampede mode without even entering serious mode. When Guy Crimson, the first demon lord, a being that has existed before most civilizations, calculates that a war against Milim could end in a draw, you know she represents something that goes beyond conventional power. She's the definition of absolute strength with no visible growth ceiling. Rimuru Tempest, the greatest growth acceleration in the history of the series, unique analytical capacity, absorption of divine essences, complete true dragon form, and at the very end of the line, divinity. The only being who went from slime level to god level in a journey that lasted the equivalent of a few years, while Milim took millennia to get to where she is. The definitive answer, based on the complete light novel material, is this. In the final arc, Rimuru surpasses Milim. Not comfortably, not in a crushing landslide right away, but he gets there. The constant evolution, the assimilation of the complete dragon factor, and the ascension to divinity place Rimuru in a tier that Milim, even with infinite power, does not inhabit in the same way. But before closing that argument, there's something that needs to be said honestly. And that's a large part of the fandom that insists Rimuru already surpasses Milim the moment he becomes a demon lord, is wrong. It's a speed reading error. Rimuru does multiply his magicules by 10 when he becomes a demon lord, yes, but Milim wasn't showing everything she had when the two of them first met. She was relaxed, playing around. The real gap between the two at that moment was far greater than 10 times. It was structural, almost ontological. Milim isn't strong because she trained hard. She's strong because that's what she has been since birth. That doesn't disappear because of a power-up. The real question here isn't brute force versus adaptation. It's the time it took each of them to get to where they got, and what that says about the nature of power in TenSura. Milim spent 2,000 years being the catastrophe everyone fears. Rimuru took a fraction of that time to reach and eventually surpass that same catastrophe. That doesn't diminish Milim. It actually does the opposite. It shows just how extraordinary she is as a benchmark. The fact that the protagonist of the series, with all his unique and ridiculous abilities, needed that entire journey just to get close to her, is the greatest proof that Milim is one of the most monstrous displays of power the isekai genre has ever produced. Rimuru's rise is not an insult to Milim. It's the confirmation that she was always the ceiling of everything that existed, until a slime decided it didn't accept ceilings. So to close this out honestly, if we're talking anime, Milim. If we're talking advanced manga, a technical tie with the edge going to Milim. If we're talking the complete light novel, Rimuru at the end, but with the caveat that most of the road was walked in her shadow. And now, the question I want echoing in your head. If Rimuru finally reaches divinity and arrives at the level of Veldanava, Milim's father, the being she always honored as the greatest power that ever existed, what does that mean for the relationship between the two of them? Because Milim spent 2,000 years carrying the memory of her father as the only power ceiling she ever knew. And then, a slime who was born 5 minutes ago in cosmic terms shows up at the same address. Does Milim see that as a defeat, or as something she never admitted she'd been waiting to happen?